Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely wild, high-stakes, true story from history. We are looking at the life of Elizabeth Packard. She was this brilliant 19th century woman who was forced into a desperate, literal battle to prove her own sanity just to keep her basic freedom. It's an incredible story about the intersection of law, medicine, and marriage, and how one person's horrific ordeal actually changed the entire legal landscape of America. So picture this. Imagine a world where just having a theological disagreement at the dinner table with your partner could result in you being legally kidnapped, like locked away in an institution totally against your will, with absolutely zero legal recourse. Sounds like some dystopian fiction, right? Well, for a married woman in the 1860s, this wasn't fiction at all. This was just the law. Just listen to these words from Elizabeth herself, because they set the stage perfectly. She said, "I was legally kidnapped." And she was right. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't a danger to society in any way. She was simply a mother of 6 who held religious and social opinions that made her husband uncomfortable. It's a quote that really highlights the shocking reality of her 19th century nightmare. To understand how something this crazy happened, we've got to go straight to the courtroom, where it all came to a head. Okay, Section 1, the trial of sanity. Let's dive right into this. The year is 1864, and we're in a completely packed courthouse in Kankakee, Illinois. But this isn't your standard criminal trial. No, this is a trial to determine a woman's fundamental reality. Elizabeth Packard is fighting for her life, her reputation, and her liberty. But, how did she even get her day in court? It all came down to this really critical legal mechanism called habeas corpus. A group of Elizabeth's friends basically begged Judge Charles R. Starr to issue this writ. In plain English, this writ legally forced her husband, Theophilus Packard, to physically bring Elizabeth before the judge and justify exactly why he was detaining her. Because without this, she would have literally remained a prisoner in her own home forever. Which brings us to Section 2, marriage, religion, and law. To understand how they got to the point where a husband was legally detaining his own wife, we need to zoom out a bit. We have to look at the historical and legal backdrop. This whole conflict was built on shifting religious ideologies and some massively skewed legal power. On one side, you have her husband, Theophilus Packard. He's a minister deeply entrenched in strict Orthodox Calvinist doctrine. And on the other side, you have Elizabeth. She was embracing this broader 19th century shift toward progressive mysticism. She was publicly sharing beliefs that totally contradicted his teachings. She even went so far as to suggest the Holy Ghost was female. In the mid-1800s, for a minister's wife to publicly challenge him in his own Bible study class, that was a massive, massive social transgression. Now, you might be thinking, okay, a social transgression shouldn't mean actual prison, right? Well, under the 19th century coverture laws, a woman's legal rights were essentially swallowed up by her husband the second she got married. She had no property rights, no custody rights, and the truly terrifying truth is that under an 1851 Illinois law, a husband could legally institutionalize his wife just by requesting it. No consent needed, no public hearing. So Theophilus, he didn't break a single rule to lock her up. He simply used the absolute unchecked power the law handed him. So her loss of freedom escalated incredibly fast. In June of 1860, Theophilus leverages those exact coverture laws and has her committed. She ends up spending over 3 agonizing years locked away. Finally, in 1863, she is released, but get this, only because they declared her incurably insane. This whole timeline is what culminates in that monumental 1864 habeas corpus trial. Let's look at Section 3, inside the asylum. We absolutely cannot just skip over those 3 years she spent locked away. What happened to her in there became the absolute fuel for the rest of her life's work. The man in charge of her fate during that horrific 42-month ordeal inside the Illinois State Asylum was Dr. Andrew McFarland. He was a very powerful, well-known asylum superintendent. And despite Elizabeth's obvious intellect and her constant assertions that she was totally sane, Dr. McFarland consistently rebuffed her. He actually viewed her intelligence and her refusal to just submit to her husband's authority as symptoms of her supposed illness. He was the gatekeeper, and he kept that gate firmly shut. But Elizabeth, being who she was, meticulously documented the conditions while she was inside. And this wasn't a place of healing. It was a place of totally unregulated abuse. Patients were being prescribed highly toxic mercury-based medicines like blue mass and dangerous tinctures of opium. They endured punitive straitjackets, awful solitary confinement, and even near drownings in freezing or scalding hot water. On top of that, civil patients were just carelessly mixed in with violent criminals.
Just imagine enduring that whole shebang, all that psychological and physical torture, simply for being a strong-minded woman who dared to disagree with her husband.
Section 4. The Fight for Freedom. So in 1863, McFarland finally discharges her as incurably insane. But her nightmare? It didn't end there. When she got back home, Theophilus took matters into his own hands. He literally created a makeshift prison for her right inside their own house, while he was arranging to ship her off to another asylum in Massachusetts. He actually nailed the nursery windows shut to keep her isolated. But Elizabeth was incredibly resourceful. Now, what's really interesting here is how she escaped. She managed to slip a desperate letter describing her confinement out of a tiny crack in the window. A vigilant friend intercepted it and delivered it straight to Judge Starr. That one single piece of paper dropping from a window is exactly what triggered the habeas corpus trial. It's straight out of a movie. So, back in the courtroom, we get this wild battle of the experts. On one side, we have Dr. J.W. Brown testifying against her. His methodology? Oh, he literally visited her home posing as a sewing machine salesman under false pretenses just to assess her. And he decided her religious views were absolute proof of insanity. But then we have Dr. Alexander Duncanson, who testified for her. He spent 3 hours having this high-level, complex theological debate with her. His conclusion was profoundly different. He stated that holding minority views is not insanity. He even told the jury he wished America had a nation of such women. So after hearing about her progressive religious views, after hearing the husband's complaints, and after hearing these two competing doctors, the jury retired to deliberate. And get this, it took them exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes. That's all it took for them to see right through the husband's control tactics and declare Elizabeth Packard completely, legally sane. She had finally won her freedom.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into a legacy of reform.
You'd think winning her freedom in court was the end of the story, right? Actually, scratch that. It was really just the beginning. She took all that immense trauma of being institutionalized and turned it into a massive national crusade to make sure this wouldn't happen to anyone else. Now, the immediate aftermath was pretty devastating. Because of those coverture laws we talked about, Theophilus legally sold all their possessions, took their children, and moved away, leaving Elizabeth completely legally destitute. But instead of giving up, she grabbed a pen. She published multiple books exposing the asylum conditions and her trial, and she used those profits to fund a relentless campaign across multiple state legislatures, demanding real change. And the craziest part? Her activism totally worked. It led to a cascade of monumental legislative victories. By 1867, she successfully lobbied for the personal liberty law in Illinois, which guaranteed jury trials for anyone accused of insanity. That's a law that actually later protected figures like Mary Todd Lincoln. Then, in 1869, her efforts helped pass the very first married women's property law in Illinois. And by 1875, she even secured postal rights for asylum patients nationally, ensuring they could never be fully silenced and cut off from the world like she almost was. There is such a fascinating modern-day epilogue to this story, too. For decades, a mental health center in Illinois was named after Dr. Andrew McFarland. Yes, the very same man who kept Elizabeth wrongfully imprisoned. But in August of 2023, in an act of absolute poetic justice, the state finally renamed the facility. Today, it is the Elizabeth Parsons Ware Packard Mental Health Center. It honors the reformer and completely strips her abuser of his legacy. So, we've seen how one single woman armed with nothing but her intellect and a smuggled piece of paper took on a massive system designed to silence her and ultimately redefined American law. But it leaves us with a lingering question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Just how fragile are the legal definitions of sanity and liberty? When the laws of the land can be so easily twisted to imprison someone simply for having a different opinion, it really makes you wonder about the permanence of the rights we hold so dearly today. Keep that in mind next time you express a dissenting view.